This is definitely one of my longer videos, but it's well worth the watch. And if you want to watch it ad and censorship free in its original unaltered state, please scroll down to the description and sign up for my streaming service Nebula and get a 40% discount on a yearly subscription. Wait until the end of the video if you want more details. Otherwise, thank you for clicking on the video and enjoy.
All right, so this may end up being a long one, but it's a good one. It's going to be an interesting time. For those of you who are new that don't watch long ass videos, there's chapters in the description. Go ahead and break it off in chunks if you need to. I hope you finish it all. You should. But we're going to jump right in. Derrick Jaxn. Where do I begin? Derrick Jaxn was a successful, super successful, really, social media personality, author, public speaker, influencer, etc. over the past decade plus. And in that time, he built a huge platform independently and independently published over half a dozen books and spoke all over the country and amassed millions of followers and views across multiple social media platforms, including 700,000 subscribers on YouTube, 1.2 million followers on Instagram, and 3.7 million friends or followers or whatever they're called on Facebook, with the majority of these follows and these dollars coming from Black women. Because of his views, Jaxn was seen as a lover of Black women and a panderer to Black women and an enemy to some Black men, but we won't give them a lot of time today. And this is because of his unyieldingly supportive and sometimes very insightful stances for Black women. He criticized the behavior of Black men in relationships and spent a lot of time telling the truth about the games that Black men would often play in relationships, giving away secrets and cheat codes that fuckboys and cheaters have used on Black women for probably generations.
Team Jaxn, what's happening? You know what? I look at my inbox every day and I've noticed a common thread, somewhat of a merry-go-round that y'all are on. So right here, right now, this is where that merry-go-round stops. I'm about to give y'all 5 signs so you can recognize these dudes who are only there to waste your time.
His Facebook page showcases the title of his most recent book, Self-Crowned, with the caption, "The answers you want, the support you need, and the celebration you deserve." And that sounds pretty good, right? He seems like my type of guy. I've been accused by more than a few critics in my comments of being fat Derrick Jaxn or woke Derrick Jaxn, and that's okay. I'll hold those. But it speaks to a weird situation. Why would I make a video kind of antagonizing him? Some of you already know. This is because his story takes some unfortunate turns and because this video isn't really about Derrick Jaxn. I know that may seem hard to imagine considering the current thumbnail and title, but it's true. Derrick Jaxn will take some shots in the video, of course, but the goal isn't to further tarnish the name of a now shamed and relatively speaking obscure Black social media figure. Instead, the goal is to use his story to analyze something bigger, to explain what it was that allowed him to attain relative fame and fortune to begin with. I'm not really here to talk about Derrick Jaxn. The goal of this video is to kind of examine the Black gender wars.
When really all the charming things that he did up front, it was never rooted in his character. It was just to emotionally cook you.
And the men will ask the women to talk about how bad y'all are. And the women will ask the men to talk about how bad you are.
What if you never find a man who will truly love you? You probably won't.
A man is nothing without a woman.
The Black gender wars is a colloquial term loosely used to describe the ongoing conflict between Black men and Black women that has really been going on in popular Black media since we had access to media 70, 80 years ago. I remember all the way back to the early 2000s, seeing Black men and Black women complain about each other on Black Planet. I remember the vitriolic and toxic behavior and insults that flew across the World Wide Web on dial-up speed in AOL chat rooms and things I really can't remember, but I know it happened. I remember the call-in radio shows where Black men and Black women would argue with each other about the same 5 topics that they had been doing probably for generations. If a woman asks you out, does the man have to pay? Who do you make a plate for first, your husband or your father? How do you feel about 50-50 dating? But With the advent of social media, regardless of the fact that we've been talking about this same shit for generations, I feel like this genre of discourse has become more toxic and pervasive and kind of concerning in its overall tone. It feels impossible now to escape this type of content on social media. Red balloon popping videos, 20 versus 1 videos, they're everywhere, and they're regularly amassing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views. Plus, we have the alpha male podcast popping up left and right. People are faking outrageous scenarios to farm outrage clicks on Instagram and TikTok. Risa Tisa, random man in Atlanta, femininity coaching. All of these things are everywhere. And that's just like the not so toxic stuff that I want to focus on. I only want to get into the ugly shit. It's a plague. It's genuinely a plague. And the funniest thing is, have you ever tried to explain this shit to like normal, healthy people in healthy relationships with healthy social media habits? Have you found yourself struggling to make sense of all the ridiculous characters and colloquial slang and the backstories and grounded theories that you need to explain this nonsense? Do you know your soft life hard wig divester from your passport bro going his own way? If you do, what has that knowledge added to your life? Probably not much. Yet we persist. And I'm sure you found yourself in a gender wars rabbit hole. And when it's done, you ask yourself, why was I there in the first place? How has consuming this content helped me or hurt me? How much time is wasted in these spaces talking about relationships by people who are not in relationships? How many times do we really need to discuss 50-50 dating?
50-50 finances in relationships is never equal. As a woman, you are bringing so much inherent worth and value to the table, not to mention the large risk you are taking simply by allowing this man to access you.
What are we talking about?
I've been asking these questions for most of my adult life and half of my childhood. And I thought I understood it before, but it wasn't until I started making content myself that I think I really understand it. In fact, I don't think you really can get what's happening if you aren't knowledgeable about how it happens, about how social media works, which some people think they do, but you probably don't. And that's why we're going to start with Derrick Jaxn. If there were ever a black man who does help us understand all sides of this ongoing discourse, it would be him. He's a man that encompasses almost every aspect of why the black gender wars exist, all in one complex, bizarre story that I think by looking at his story, we maybe won't stop the onslaught of gender wars nonsense, but at least we'll understand it better. I don't think that has to be gendered, but
it doesn't have to be gendered.
For a woman, for a black woman specifically, when that's not supposed to be possible. And the flip side is the same for me. I'm not supposed to be able to raise, to keep a household on just my work as a man. Mm-hmm. And she's not supposed to be able to lean into this, white image of femininity. But
there was structural policy that prevented it for a lot of black women. I think that Shatima Threadcraft speaks about this in Intimate Justice, where, there were labor laws that black women were at home taking care of their households, and the white women, they advocated for black women to have to go to work for them. And if you were seen out leisurely as a black woman, you out here looking like me. I don't want none of that. They were in.
Wow.
If we are okay with something, even if it is not popular, even if it's not what everybody's doing, even if it's going to make us show up a little bit different, if we're okay, let's just be okay.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Let's be okay with the truth of it.
As you say that, I think about the fact that we have always been relatively transgressive, right? We're not poly, by the way, because that always comes up. No shade to my poly people.
No.
It's not us. I feel like people look at us being transgressive and but then overall, they recognize the quality of our relationship. So they're like, whatever it is must be working.
I had a clip from MSNBC, and the brother the researcher who was talking about it was an economist, and he talked about the high heel effect, right? And the high heel effect is essentially how it is that a number of policies, procedures, things of that nature had been geared towards women in order for women to, once again, engage in equity, inclusion, all of these different things. But if you look at the actual data, all of that shit with the white women, all of it right? So once again, in the Black community specifically, you all are attempting to emulate it is more so, it's not even a relational, it's an economic dynamic that allows you to relate in this way that we've never had access to.
Right.
So once again, why is this your ideal? Because you believe that it will remove you from scrutiny, and you believe that it will allow you to have a feeling of superiority over other people who do not have this access. It will make you feel as if though your life is actually successful.
Right. It takes the taint of the nigga off. Before we continue, I want to put out a few disclaimers. First, I want to be clear that this video will pretty much only be focused on relationships between straight Black men and straight Black women. For one, those are the primary groups that participate in this discourse. And two, that's what I can speak on with expertise. There are robust conversations around queer conflicts within the Black community and beyond. If you're interested in discussions that center those experiences, I suggest creators like Khadijah and Bo, Urban Revelist, Cat Black, Jade Fox, Philosopher Noir, etc. But that won't be what this is. Also, the core of this video will focus on Black relationship drama and not some of the other uglier aspects of the conflicts that go on between Black men and Black women that are often pulled into gender wars discourse. The gender wars as a concept is very loaded and a problematic term because it implies that there's two sides to this battle, and in reality, that's not a good way of looking at things for the most part. I'm going to be focusing on the robust world of male and female oriented dating content for Black men and women that drives the gender wars, but there's also the very ugly and rabid world of content dedicated to denigrating, embarrassing, and harming Black women, and a corresponding but much smaller version of the same content against Black men. So if you're looking for me to comment on some of the uglier situations that have happened between Black men and Black women that involve sexual violence, assault, or abuse, and things like that, I'm not really going to touch on that too much. There's already a ton of content discussing those problems and the misogynistic rage bait content that pervades the internet against Black women. I've personally done nearly 10 hours worth of videos on the manosphere that I will leave in the description where I get into stuff like that. And I've also done plenty of videos examining the challenges that Black men face in the world. So I don't want to make that what this is. I want to tread new-ish ground and avoid getting into the darker, more violent stuff, although this will get a little dark. And I also think it's important to remember that those stories get a lot of attention, but they are extremes. And I want to treat them like that in the moment. So with that out of the way, let's jump right on in. Part 1, A Star is Born. So if you're normal and healthy and not chronically online in Black social media faces, there's a strong chance you don't know who Derrick Jaxn is or why his story is so interesting. So let's fix that. I am dragging you to hell with me. Derrick Jaxn was born in 1989 to a single mother. As the youngest of several children, I couldn't quite pin down the amount of people he grew up with, but the key thing is that he was the only boy. Derrick watched his mother struggle to raise her family on her own, and this experience caused him to develop a strong sense of empathy for the realities of Black women and single motherhood in general. In a way, Jaxn attended Tuskegee University where he played football and studied business, but he seemed to have that entrepreneurial spirit, and immediately he leaned into motivational speaking, leadership, and building his platform. And it's hard to say just how quickly he started to make waves, but he quickly started to make waves. The oldest video on his channel is from 2012, and there's no telling like what had been deleted or re-uploaded. I know some of my oldest videos you cannot see. And back then, really, you wanted your stuff not just on YouTube, but Facebook, World Star Hip Hop, the Black blogosphere, etc. And Derrick was regularly going viral in all spaces possible. His earliest content is actually spoken word, which to be honest, should have been everyone's red flag.
People are surprised at her poise and the fact that she's intellectual because she doesn't smack her gum or roll her neck like she was expected to.
In my head, a man that looks like Derrick Jaxn doing spoken word poetry is likely the devil, but I digress. However, let's not avoid the fact that yes, if you're looking at him, Derrick Jaxn kind of reminds you of an extra from a Tyler Perry movie, if Tyler Perry wasn't so colorist against Black men. Jaxn was a former tight end for Tuskegee University, and according to what I could find, is around 6'5", and he's got to be around 230, 250 pounds of mostly lean muscle. So Jaxn was a ready-built fantasy of Black masculinity. Not only did he look the part, but he was sensitive and well-spoken, and he seemed to love women, but also present a spirit of leadership and authority. He truly had the total package to be popular among Black women. And eventually, he very much was. And that made his presence online interesting because here he is talking from his car, like many other black early vlog commentary type creators were doing, except a lot of those guys were very misogynistic. He's coming up at the same time as many of the earliest bastions of the black manosphere are also beginning to take root. So you have Derrick Jaxn right next to guys like Sergeant Willie Pete, Tommy Sotomayor, Angry Man, etc., making this highly vitriolic and harmful content about black women and just being the weirdest types of dudes online. And I imagine that he maybe got mixed up in that because the aesthetics were similar. However, despite what the black manosphere tries to say, their community is not growing. The types of men that truly follow and enjoy that type of content are relatively small in number and low in funds. So there's never much growth potential for those figures to really grow. Although, again, they did go viral on a lot of occasions. Tommy Sotomayor was everywhere in the 2010s. And this made Jaxn, as this lone figure supporting black women, kind of a big deal. If there were a list of A-list social media figures in the mid to late 2010s, he'd have definitely been on that list. And considering the type of image black men were often popularized for having and for the type of treatment black women got online and often got from black men, this was a good thing, period. It was a good thing to have an image of black masculinity that defied so many negative stereotypes that black women and some black men could look to. But I was always a little suspicious. I was like, you'll see by the end. There was something just a tad off about Derrick Jaxn and his content and the nature of what he was saying. This vibe check was like really close, but not quite where it needs to be. And initially, like way back then, I kind of chalked this up to my own isms around women and sexism and stuff that I was unpacking at the time. And so I mostly just ignored his content because it wasn't for me anyway. But after a few years of grad school and seeing him continue to grow and getting into gender studies and stuff, it hit me why Jaxn wasn't quite right. Although Derrick Jaxn was very pro-black woman, Derrick Jaxn wasn't really much of a feminist. Now, this in isolation shouldn't be a huge red flag. I don't really refer to myself as a feminist, despite what my content tends to project to the world. And this is not because I have an aversion to feminist theory. I'm a person whose core readings in grad school all hinge around feminist gender studies. But it's because of that reading that I recognize that feminists and feminism are loaded terms for a man to describe himself as. And while I think men that call themselves feminists are probably mostly okay, men who promote themselves and monetize themselves as feminists are very much a mixed bag. And if I have to be honest, probably should not be trusted. So I just personally avoid that altogether and hope that my actions speak for me. But that's still not really describing Derrick Jaxn. Derrick Jaxn's actions didn't quite fit the mold of what a male feminist really would be, because his rhetoric and advice about relationships, while being pro-woman, was not quite to the point of engaging with real critical analysis of the challenges women face. It all mostly just hinged on helping women understand how to better fit into traditional ideas and frameworks of what relationship and gender should be, of what a real man should be and what a real woman should be. And to me, that didn't sit right. It felt a little too convenient. However, again, I left it there because very much contradicting everything I just said, I'm going to say something here that might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to die on this hill. For the audience Derrick Jaxn was targeting, the nigga gave good advice.
But if you're treating somebody like they're the only one for you whenever y'all first start off, you're going to continuously waste time trying to teach them how to be right for you when they ain't right for you. And then you're going to get bitter and stay disappointed with your guard up for the next person and possibly miss your blessing. But I've seen women try to take on whatever battle, whatever storm that a dude is going through, they try to take that on themselves. So the biggest asset to you, if you're an empath, is the ability to distinguish between what's involving yourself with and what's not. Not just trying to find somebody who's perfect, but especially when you are trying to get over somebody, whenever you're moving on from somebody, when you just extracted somebody who had become a major part of your life, you do not need to be isolating yourself. There's value in understanding that, yes, I miss him, but I'm still better than what he has to offer. I still deserve more than what he currently has to bring to the table.
I'm sorry, I remember thinking this 10 years ago, and I confirmed it while researching for this video. For the specific demographic of Black women with those relatively conservative, churchy upbringings, things we'll talk about a little later, Jaxn genuinely did a great job of illuminating elements of love and relationships that those women likely didn't know enough about and were probably hurting their ability to engage effectively in the dating market. Now, while he was good at that, again, he didn't seem to be interested in thinking bigger about why there are so many single mothers, why so many Black men were struggling to maintain gainful employment, why gender roles were constantly in conflict with Black life, and it was so hard for Black men and women to be real men and women. And he had no interest in critiquing those things or critiquing the status quo as a whole. He just wanted to teach women how to win at the game that was being played. And while I have some criticisms that I'll get to later of that, I can't be mad at that. But it does leave some questions, like, why is this the game for Black men and women? Why is advice that hinges on upholding traditional roles so prominent among a group of people where those roles are actually very rare? What set Jaxn apart from the Steve Harveys and the Tyler Perrys or even the Kevin Samuelses of the world? All of them also had substantial audiences of Black women. Yes, Kevin Samuels, believe it or not, had a huge Black female audience. Why is that? Well, I have some theories, but first we're gonna have to do a little history and leave Derrick here for quite a while until we get to the last half of the video. Part 2, a real man or a real woman would, yeah, that's a horrible title. Fuck, I'm gonna have to figure out something else for that. Anyway, there's this great and kind of powerful clip that goes viral every once in a while of a conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin. It often gets clipped just for this one section where Nikki is speaking to the desire for her or Black women in general to be lied to by their men to create harmony in the home. And I've always been annoyed by this clip, mostly because after seeing the whole thing, I think this clip really undermines the depth of this conversation.
If I love you, I can't lie to you.
Of course you can lie to me, and you will. If you love me and you're going off with Maddie someplace, you're lying to me. Because what the hell do I care about the truth? I care if you're there. What Billie Holiday say, hush now, don't explain.
All right, I accept that.
Of course you'll lie to me, because I don't even want to care. What does the truth matter?
Throughout this hour-long exchange, both Nikki and James are trying to basically do one thing, which is get the other individual to understand the profound pain that it takes to perform gender appropriately in a Black body, especially in America, under white supremacy, under capitalism, and to some extent for both, under patriarchy. And with hindsight, it's really frustrating to watch some of the most brilliant minds in Black American history not quite recognize what they're doing. They both seem to realize how impossible what they're asking is, and yet they keep asking it because neither is willing to part with it. They just can't get away from the traditional roles that they have been taught. It speaks to how deeply ingrained the notion of gender is for Black people, despite the fact that the correct performance of gender by American white-centered standards is all but impossible for us to achieve, and we have forever been barred from every lane needed to achieve those ideal notions of masculinity and femininity in this country. So, brace for another hot take. Gender is a scam. And in saying that, I don't mean it in the way that suggests that everyone should be non-binary and use they, them pronouns, or that concepts like masculine or feminine are fake and should be abolished. I still move through the world as a man for a reason, and I think it's a valid reason. What I really mean is that the rules and regulations that we have set up for how we understand and experience and project gender are fake and dumb. And for Black people, they habitually cause us pain. So some of my critics who watch me regularly, because I know you're gonna see this may sound rich because I have a relatively traditional patriarchal household. My wife doesn't work and does the majority of the housework while I pay all the bills. All my bell hooks and Kimberly Crenshaw reading in grad school, and I still ended up with a trad wife. I'm a fraud, y'all, and I'm sorry. I'm also a secret Republican and a Packers fan. Now, this is obviously not serious, and it doesn't undermine the framework of how progressive politics and belief systems work, because they don't expect or require one way of doing things. The whole point of progressive ideology is self-determination and the idea that there are a multitude of ways to live and experience life, and people should be allowed to do what works for them. But that's not how Black people, or really anybody in this country, looks at the framing of gender. we assume that gender is blank and should be blank. And if you are not blank, whatever that ideal is, then you're not doing gender properly and something must be wrong with you. And this is really fucking stupid because nobody is performing gender in the way that TV and media and our history books tell us we're supposed to. Yes, right now, because I am a wealthy, famous YouTuber, my wife does not have to work. However, up until a couple of years ago, my wife made more money than me. And we had a 50-50 egalitarian household where she did half of the cooking, cleaning, and childcare, and I did half of the cooking, cleaning, and childcare. And we did that because that's what actually worked for us. And there was really never any tension or issues between us when it came to how we lived our lives. And anybody that may have had a negative thing to think about how transgressive we were and having that egalitarian household definitely didn't say shit to our face.
Because one criticism I get consistently, bad faith criticism, but you know, it's one that happens enough, is that I'm some type of like domineering, monstrous patriarch in the home while doing all of the feminisms online. The dynamic we have now is new and not the norm. But at no point in our relationship, including now, has there ever been a your money, my money dynamic.
No, so when we were getting ready to get married, right? Started to make like future plans. Like, this is it. We're going to be each other's person. We started to combine finances even then. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating for that. I don't know if that was right or wrong, but that goes back to how relationships are customizable, right? And so for us, it worked, and we always pulled our money together. Right. Now, no one lost their own account and all that kind of stuff. No one lost access to any money that they earned, but we had the understanding that what we earned was going to go toward building this life that we wanted together.
Right.
But the big thing is we were very in step with the life we wanted.
Yeah.
And we were very vocal when maybe you took a turn or I took a turn. It was like, I was kind of thinking we would go this way. And I think that's what helped us build the confidence to know, like, okay, we can trust each other in that way.
Yeah. The one thing that 9 times out of 10 is contributing to the communication issues in a relationship is gender role expectations. Genuinely, right? And if both parties are working in the household, the conversation tends to float around, well, why am I not being treated in this way? And why are you not engaging in this way as it relates to, once again, the division of household labor? So in any respect, right? What I recognize is that the 50-50 conversation is usually a conversation where two people who do not have the access to this quote unquote ideal socioeconomic strata where they're able to perform these gender roles, depending upon how much they've internalized these gender roles, it is correlated to the amount of discomfort that they're going to experience in these spaces. So in other words, you feel like less of a woman because your man don't parade you around out of town and doing X, Y, and so you're not able to be in your feminine. You feel like less of a man because you're not able to do any of these things. Why is it that the two of you have internalized these concepts and these conceptualizations as the only way that you can be as an individual, as a person? It's foolish, right? You are arguing over home economics, and economics literally is the way in which you keep a house. Like that's what the word economics means. But that requires a discussion, that requires a negotiation, and that requires both of you all to contribute something. So either way, if your 50 is financial and your 50 is labor, that's still 50-50.
It's still 50-50. That's real.
But here's the thing. When you do a little research, you realize that our dynamic is not so odd in this country, both now and historically. A Pew Research study from 2017 shows that only 23% of married households feature a husband as the sole breadwinner, a number that I guarantee you is lower in 2024 after COVID, and a number that has shrunk steadily since the 70s. But guess how many people do you think were living in a household where a man was a sole breadwinner in the 70s? You know, the good old days when men were men and women knew their place. 75%? 65%? No, 49%. So 50 years ago, when many of y'all parents were born, i.e. the children of your grandparents, only half of them were born into traditional patriarchal households. most of them were born into homes where both parents worked. So why the fuck do we keep having this conversation, and do people keep getting away with saying modern women or modern men don't want to be men or women anymore? When was that ever actually a thing, except for in people's fantasies and propaganda around how gender is supposed to work? It really is shocking that there are people making content in 2024 about some bullshit that didn't even exist in 1974, yet we're still arguing about it in comment sections and with response videos and on TikTok and all those things. And it gets even more confusing when you add that racial aspect, because that 49% and 23% is all American men. So you can rest assured that those numbers drastically decrease explicitly for Black men, because historically Black men have always been excluded from all forms of well-paid labor or the tools needed to pursue well-paid labor. And because of this, Black households have since Reconstruction always been predominantly non-traditional. Historically, Black women have always worked, and Black men have always participated in home chores at higher levels than their white counterparts, though not nearly enough if you pay attention to your grandmothers and great-grandmothers. And I think this is partially what Nikki Giovanni is getting at watching her mother slave away in her home in order to fulfill a patriarchal role of a woman. When I say gender is a scam, I think a lot of people are gonna look at that as a radical hot take from the super left FD signifier and all his leftist liberal stuff, but I think you already agree with me. I think, and in fact, I know that a lot of you watching this feel in conflict with how you're perceived as a man or a woman on a daily basis. All of us constantly feel disconnected from the way that manhood and womanhood are often framed for us. We all feel like the world treats us unfairly based on our gender, and that we have to act and present a certain way to be respected or seen as worthy or avoid being harmed in the world. Black men feel like they'll never be seen as capable of wisdom or leadership or gentleness and benevolence like white men, and Black women feel like they'll never be seen as soft or feminine or worthy of protection as white women. And this feeling is in many ways correct, because those traits and ideologies around gender were never meant for us in the first place. They were never meant to be attached to Black bodies going all the way back to slavery. That's not who we were groomed to be. We were meant to be beasts of burden. And whenever we get close to that idealistic image or framing of gender in this country, goalposts will be moved, fathers will be killed, mothers will be thrown in jail, and livestock will be stolen or towns will be burned down. We were never meant to actually participate in the framework of how white people in America organize their families and communities. And that's why they've always created barriers for our participation. White supremacy has made it abundantly clear from our first days in this country that real man and real woman always means real white.
There was this paper, and I'll figure out what the reference is. I can't remember, but it's called Psychological Androgyny. And it talks about how Black women have had to occupy a mindset of psychological androgyny for quite some time. And it resonated with me and a number of the Black women who read it, because it was like, we know the cult of true womanhood was never meant for us. And so we have operated outside of that for generations and been penalized for it romantically. You know, like that it's a necessity, but a resented necessity.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't like what being in the working world does to you, the strengths that you have to embody, you know, the disposition you have to take on. That's not feminine, that's not attractive, that's not beautiful. But our household can't survive if you don't do this work. You know, like, it's like, financially, we can't take care of a family without it, but I want you to not bring that home. And then to your point with what Nikki Giovanni is saying, it's like, well, when you're out in the world dealing with whiteness and, you know, being excommunicated from white patriarchy, but wanting to hold on to a form of patriarchy that's your own, don't bring that home either. Especially, and this is, you know, this is the toxic part of it, especially if you ain't bringing enough money to be bringing that home.
Right. Because white femininity and there's always been a difference.
Yeah.
There's always been a difference in how white women are expected and allowed to show up versus how Black women are expected and allowed to show up. And that should be understood.
Yeah.
Right. And so there is a little bit of a rub in that there are some spaces in the discourse where it's Black women trying to attain white standards of femininity. And
I think that's a lot of it.
And good luck. Good luck. I can't speak to you. I don't know. I'm not on that side of TikTok. So that's,
and if you
that's
get too close to it, that's when, even if you were to get close to it, they will shift the goalposts. This is something really powerful that Dr. Hargens pointed out, is that there have always been Black women operating in divine femininity, higher femininity spaces, hyper femininity, whatever. And they still got treated like shit. The scene from Color Purple is such a perfect example of this.
You children are so clean.
I wish I could show you this clip in its entirety, but unfortunately here on YouTube, a lot of movies, especially Black movies, have extremely strict copyright rules, meaning that if I only show 5-10 seconds of this classic film from over 30 years ago, it will get copyright struck and YouTube will take all of my money and possibly even give me a channel strike. That's one of the reasons why I joined Nebula, so that I can make videos like this and like so many other videos on my channel that engage with Black media but don't have to worry about being treated like a bootlegger just for talking about it in a video. While this will not make or break the video, if you do want to see this video uncut, again, sign up for my streaming service Nebula, link in the description.
But when has white supremacy ever stopped us? We still seek to attain and affirm our gender unflinchingly. And through that, we tend to speak of this performance as innate and natural, despite the fact that this Americanized concept of gender was not really native to our origins in Africa. In Africa, there are a multitude of ways that different cultures conceptualize men and women, male and female. Some societies were patriarchal, some were matriarchal. There was no one way African civilizations constructed gender roles. In reality, the way we perform gender and patriarchy right now is based on European ideals of gender and community and organizing, where women are mostly property, et cetera, but I don't want to get further into that. But I want to ask, how did it become that we got so invested in this framework? What really had us on board for the American dream of gender like we are now? After slavery and during Reconstruction, the belief and policy was that freed slaves should now figure out a way to model themselves in the ways of the nation that they were in. Of course, some people got sent out of the country and there's a bunch of different plans, but overall, most Black people were just trying to get on with their lives, and they were getting on with their lives in the only way that they kind of understood, which was to mimic the things that they had been doing up until this point and the ways of the white people that once oppressed and controlled them. And if you know anything about your history of post-slavery, you know how that went. So eventually we began to fight for our right to self-determine and engage in the behavior and lives that we desire. By the 1950s, the American Civil Rights Movement rises up as the biggest wave of organized resistance against white supremacy and structural racism that the country had ever seen, but not without flaws. And one major flaw was the innate social conservatism of the movement, which manifested in the push for integration into the dominant social order, including a focus on traditional gender roles and patriarchal culture, something that created significant turmoil within the movement, eventually leading to divisions within the movement and it falling out of favor. A lot of people don't know that everybody within the civil rights movement didn't get along, and there were issues with sexism, with the women feeling like they were being treated as second-class citizens. And modern scholars have gone as far as to describe the civil rights movement as a civil rights movement for Black men. Toward the end of the 1960s, however, the civil rights movement had become more open to radical ideology and a little less beholden to conservative thoughts. You see MLK marching with future Pan-Africanist Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, and calling for reparations, a shift in tone that is likely what got him killed, which opens the door for an even more Black radical power movement to take root. By the early 70s, in major cities across the country, Black people, Black men, and women are fighting the system much more directly. Some are low-key waging unilateral warfare against the state. While much of the civil rights movement was initially seeking to make room for Black people in the dominant system, the Black Power movement was very different in that it was looking to tear the system down completely. And getting back to our core topic, Because they were looking to tear the system down, the Black Power movement was much more progressive around gender than any of its predecessors. Now, this isn't to say that the Black Power movement didn't have issues with sexism itself, but it was very explicit in acknowledging the problem of sexism and seeking to dismantle it. It recognized that sexism and patriarchy were basically tools of fascism and an oppressive state. So, Black women had prominent roles of leadership in many aspects of these movements. Anti-misogyny was explicitly written into the bylaws of the Black Panther Party. And for a moment in that unity, Black men and women had the powers that be worried. And in the face of the ongoing struggle and unrest that came from both the civil rights movement and the later Black Power movement, you see the powers that be begin to capitulate over the course of time. So between the 1950s and the 1970s, we get certain victories in the form of legislation such as affirmative action, Roe v. Wade, Miranda rights, and of course, the Civil Rights Bill. And the outcome was unprecedented advances for African American people, which is very good. But it does have a few unintended consequences. Something that writers Too Black and Razul Mowat call laundering Black rage that we talked about on a recent podcast.
Was from the book Black Against Empire. They made a point about why the Black Panthers declined. There's like a lot of people point just to repression, like the COINTELPRO program and stuff. That's definitely a major part of it. But another part is just affirmative action programs. You know, the end of the Vietnam War, the end of the end of the draft, more specifically before the war, the end of the draft. You know, people just, because the point was to show that you don't take this revolutionary route because you can go get a job here, because there is a chance in America, because there is opportunity, right? But the funny thing is, it's the rage that creates that opportunity. If people didn't burn the shit down, if people weren't willing to go the revolutionary route, that concession never happens.
Basically, after getting these wins, we got a lot of new opportunities, and there was suddenly a rush for integration again within this dominant social order. Folks that were trying to fight the power and dismantle the system suddenly cut their hair and pressed or permed it and updated their resumes and traded their black jackets and dashikis for suits and dresses. And with this, the egalitarian dynamic between Black men and women that had been somewhat developing and really was relatively normal if you look at previous eras, became even more patriarchal because patriarchy was considered and presented as the ideal. And we see this reflected in so many aspects of Black life and government and social policy. An easy example of this is whether Black shows and movies of the 70s began to turn in the 80s and 90s, going from depicting Black life within certain working class struggles to overly emphasizing progress and prosperity and Black folks who were elites. And these elites often had much more traditional gender roles. Of course, this isn't every show or every episode, and there's definitely something to be said about Black media not always being about the struggle, but there's also something to be said about how depictions of prosperity and Black excellence tend to subterfuge and kind of throw in certain messages and ideologies that in the long run aren't helpful to all Black people. And they definitely got away with some bullshit when it comes to gender. My favorite example is Claire Huxtable, who is a whole ass lawyer in The Cosby Show, but you would never know by the way she's portrayed in the show. I literally can't think of a single moment in that show where she actually did some lawyer shit. She was only a mom. You combine that with shows like Family Matters and The Fresh Prince and a bunch of other stuff, and you suddenly recognize what type of messages had become normal to people my age and younger. One of the most interesting relics from this transitional time is a promotional video partially created by Black magazines like Jet and Ebony called How to Sell to the Negro.
I've got a story here that I think is big, really big, because it's bound to have a terrific impact on business. I'm talking about a new market, a big new market, millions upon millions of new prospects with $15 billion to spend. That's right, I said $15 billion. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Yes, this is the market we're talking about, the new Negro family. Their name is Wells or Wilson, Smith or Brown or Alexander or Breen. They live in Chicago, in Atlanta or New York.
And in this video, they present this growing world where Black people are able to enter into the dominant social order, full of prosperity, apart from racism, and of course, with that traditional gender idealized family unit of a man as the patriarch, the white as a submissive helpmate or whatever they call it, and two beautiful children. And as I alluded to a second ago, if you're a certain age and certain background, this is the image of Blackness that you aspired to in your youth. If you were the child of college-educated Black folks in the late 70s to the late 80s, you probably had it pretty good. You were the talented 10th or the children of the talented 10th. Some of y'all went to Jack and Jill's. Some of y'all went to big mega churches. Some of y'all went to HBCUs. We are the children of the elite, and we were expected to follow in the footsteps towards this low-key, very white image of what being Black excellence was supposed to be. And all of these institutions are invested in reproducing that image. They surround us with the false reality of what could be, despite the fact that racism didn't go away and most Black men still didn't have access to the resources needed to be a solo provider. Black women still weren't treated as feminine in the outside world or seen as soft or being worthy of protection. A few people were able to make it, probably some of y'all's parents, but most Black folks were barely any closer to attaining that idealized image, and thus we continue to get scammed. But here's the thing. For Black men, this dynamic plays out in a way that offers us a few scenarios out. So maybe you won't be Uncle Phil or Cliff Huxtable, but you could be an old playboy like Billy Dee Williams or an OG like OG Bobby Johnson. Maybe you'll dedicate your life to a cause or a craft. Men like Kevin Samuels and Umar Johnson are seen as champions of ideal masculinity in the Black family and don't have their own families. That's one of the benefits of patriarchy. But for women, the pressure is very different. For Black women particularly, there's no escape for this shit. A woman without a man, without a family, is considered broken in our society. And a Black woman in that scenario, especially one that happened to have children out of wedlock, is considered a deviant who is actively contributing to harming the community. You can be the most successful, beautiful, talented Black woman in the world, but without a man or kids with a man, people will look at you side-eye. But paradoxically, and maybe as a byproduct of that added pressure, we all know that Black women are doing a lot better than Black men as a unit. In fact, most Black women are able to stay out of trouble, get education, get the good job, get the look, and do all the things that society tells them they can't do. But then there's still that last most important piece, getting the man, and that shit is hard. And it leaves a lot of Black women in a vulnerable space of desperation. And that's where a guy like Derrick Jaxn comes in.
What do I do for the male gaze? How important the priority I placed on the male gaze and male approval to acquire a partner was because I bought into a certain type of elitism. I went to Spelman, HBCU, Black Mecca, and I'm like, I'm supposed to have a Morehouse husband at the end of this. I was a person who knew, like, I'm going for the degree and the MRS. That's what I want to get out of this experience. You know what I mean? And it's just like, what do I, how do I cast myself to the best of my ability as a dark-skinned, nappy-haired Black woman in the role that I want to play, which is wife. And so that was my orientation, because I felt like my value was attached to that. I felt like, I'm going to have my degree, I'm going to be successful, and I have to check off the married box to win this game. It was competition. So for me, it wasn't a competition with other women. It was a competition with, like, am I going to win at white supremacy in the ways that they said Black women couldn't win?
Part 3, avoiding being the mule. Picking up where I left off a second ago, Black men, by virtue of how patriarchy works, have a multitude of avenues to cosplay white masculinity. We can never attain it, we can never be it, but we can at least look the part to a lot of people. And in that, receive a modicum of the benefits. As Black men achieve in academics or athletics or business or just in affability and personality, we are rewarded with some level of access to what's called the patriarchal dividend. We are respected, we are funneled into positions of power, we are even protected when we do harm to our women in our communities. We even make more money, etc. A common gender war talking point is how Black women are much more educated than Black men, which is true. And some manosphere types like to point this out as a sign of inequality and how society is actually set up to favor women. And there is an interpretation of this fact that does show how there are ways that white supremacy targets Black men more viciously than it does Black women. However, despite this fact, Black men as a group still out-earn Black women, even as you control for education status. Despite the fact that Black women have a significant lead in educational attainment, Black men still slightly edge them in terms of general income. I'm sure there's going to be people in the comments telling me all their pocket theories of why this is still not related to patriarchy. In fact, I'm counting on it. Your angry comments make me money, but it's still going to be wrong. The answer is patriarchy. That's how this works. But for Black women, there is no patriarchy, at least not direct access to it. In fact, there's even less access to it because of black men's lack of access to it. The distance between black men and idealized masculinity is shorter than black women and idealized femininity. And many black women know and feel this inherently, probably starting as children. When we look at beauty standards for women, when we look at the images of femininity that are celebrated in our culture, the standards are set at the idealized image of white femininity and far from where black women tend to be. Even black women who are depicted as beautiful tend to be as close to the white image of femininity as possible. It starts with lighter skinned black women with more ambiguous features and looser hair textures. And then even getting into darker skinned women, they have smaller features and those same textures. The pretty for a black girl trope comes to mind. And often when people say that you're pretty for a black girl, they're often thinking more about Lupita Nyong'o, not Michaela Cole. And for the record, both of these women are gorgeous, just so y'all don't get on my ass in the comments. But all of this sets black women up for a cruelly conflicting experience in the dating world. They're already marginalized by the fact that the men that want to date them the most are least likely to have access to patriarchy in the traditional sense. And thus, due to structural racism, they're required, if not just for their own survival, to embody traditionally masculine traits, to go out and get degrees and get good jobs and be strong and all these things that we often depict as idealized but also negative features about black womanhood. Then these things push them even further from the feminine ideal. And then they got to deal with niggas. And while I love my brothers, I know some of y'all niggas be on that bullshit. And they do too. So when a Derrick Jaxn comes in and says he can show you how to deal with niggas to get all of those things that you want, yeah, I see the vision. An article on blackfeminisms.com had this to say about the type of black women Jaxn is most popular with.
I would say that they are likely early millennial and Gen X, single, and potentially in possession of several markers of middle-class status. For example, a college degree or stable income, a standard deviation or two above the average income for their group. Almost certainly the majority of them identify as straight or heterosexual. And this identifier, often presumed to endow a person with privilege, when added to the lived reality of black women, actually opens a sizable group of women to exploitation.
This descriptor may not seem significant, but reveals probably the core reason women participate in gender wars in general, and also why Derrick Jaxn was the king of it at one time. In short, so much gender wars content aimed at black women is rooted in patriarchy, but a benevolent image of patriarchy that black women and all women are very much invested in. You cannot talk about the gender wars as it pertains to black women and not engage with the role that patriarchy plays and how black women participate in these spaces, what their desires seem to be, and how this shapes the space as a whole, especially people that make content in this space. As I showed in the last section, black folks, for better or worse, are deeply invested in traditional ideologies of gender. And with that comes an investment in patriarchy by both parties. To some, this might feel like a spicy take, and it should never be a comfortable thing for any man to point out that women appreciate patriarchy in ways that we often don't discuss, but that doesn't change the fact that this is true. Black women, like all women, are deeply invested in patriarchy and are often highly protective of it, even as they see little benefit from it. Worse, women with limited actual experience or knowledge of men tend to have a very idealized, imaginary, benevolent form of patriarchy in mind when they imagine how masculinity is supposed to work. This is not something I gleaned from Manosphere Reddit post or some nonsense dudes on Twitter. This is basic feminist theory.
The contemporary presence of female-headed households has led many people to assume that children in these households are not learning patriarchal values because no male is present. They assume that men are the sole teachers of patriarchal thinking. Yet many female-headed households endorse and promote patriarchal thinking with far greater passion than two-parent households. Because they do not have an experiential reality to challenge false fantasies of gender roles, women in such households are far more likely to idealize the patriarchal male role and patriarchal men than are women who live with patriarchal men every day. We need to highlight the role women play in perpetuating and sustaining patriarchal culture so that we will recognize patriarchy as a system women and men support equally, even if men receive more rewards from that system.
That's bell hooks, the Beyonce of black feminist thought. And if you understand your bell hooks lore, you know that was a really funny joke for me to just make. I think in popular media and in academia, and especially online, Black feminists are probably one of the first of any minority group to build a prominent space for themselves and create networks of support, intellectual development, influence, and content. I think there have been a variety of writers, authors, bloggers, YouTubers, and plenty of prominent Twitter and Instagram accounts, along with a few celebrities that have helped spread the ideology of Black feminism across all of media for the last decade, to where the dominant voice for Black women in all of media is inexorably tied to Black feminist thought. And I want to be clear, I think that's very much a good thing. But, but I think sometimes this gives us a false image of what's really going on in the world. I think sometimes the ubiquity of Black feminism in media obfuscates the reality that most Black women are not in those media bubbles, that much of this imagery is aspirational and does not always include all Black women. Black women are the most educated minority group in the country, we know this, but that still really only means about 30% of all Black women. So it feels like when we champion the image of Black feminism as the image of all Black women, we are either purposefully or accidentally excluding a large percentage of Black women who do not feel seen within that image. The image that all Black women are these perfect, well-read feminist scholars invisibilizes and kind of like tokenizes that larger group of Black women who are still unpacking conservative ideologies that they were given as children along with Black men, all while still trying to survive and hopefully thrive in a patriarchal world without the benefit of a Black feminist reading list. To wrap it up in a bow, Bell Hooks' All About Love has sold far less copies than Steve Harvey's Act Like a Lady and Think Like a Man. And that is not something that should be ignored, because all of these women, the devout, well-read Black feminists and the Black women just out here trying to make it, still know what it feels like to be both Black and a woman in society. And they understand and feel the conflict within that intersection, as I alluded to in the last chapter. They both constantly feel like they need to earn that womanhood, to earn that femininity, except one group has a lot of tools to unpack how that works and the other doesn't. And when those conversations happen across communal and class divisions, it can almost feel like they're speaking different languages to each other. And when you consider that one group has the dominant voice of media, the dominant voice of culture, it kind of makes it so that other group doesn't feel like they're being seen. So when that other group pops up on the Alpha Male podcast or their own not so great podcasts, or even worse examples of media and rhetoric coming from certain Black women, instead of looking at it systemically like we should do any societal social issue, we just say, well, those Black women, they don't speak for us. They're just outliers. Patriarchy prescribes an incredibly harmful plan of action for Black women to follow in order to be seen and treated as feminine, to be treated as soft and as a woman, and more specifically here, in order to find mates. There's a classic quote from Zora Neale Hurston's book, Their Eyes Are Watching God, where Janie, the main character, is told by her grandmother that the Black woman is the mule of the world. And in that moment, her grandmother is trying to somewhat save Janie by marrying her to a much, much older, highly undesirable man who just so happens to have land and money. This is an oversimplification of the story, and that's like a complex scene with a lot going on. But I only bring it up to point out that Black women, like all women, have been taught to see marriage, and more importantly, being a wife, as an accolade and achievement that will garner them status, respect, and certain privileges under patriarchy. At a minimum, it should make it so they're not the mule.
The role of a wife was romanticized. You know, Claire Huxtable, Whitley Gilbert, you know, like all these women, right? These characters were big to me growing up, right? And to other women around me growing up. And so fast forward, I find the partner, I say, okay, I'm gonna do the marriage thing, and we're doing whatever. And it was, I didn't realize it, but a switch flipped, and I started to behave and show up in a way that I assumed was, one, going to be well received, but also was like indicative of a wife.
Okay, so you have that version of me and the evolution across 2 decades, you know, like of, why am I buying into this so hard? What do I think the benefits of patriarchy are for me and white supremacy are for me? Like, what? And so divesting from that, not divesting from Black love and relationships, divesting from that, not wanting to be possessive of a partner, control a partner, all in this idea that I have to win this type of game, helped me to realize like, wow, okay, I want to be with someone for the sake of enjoying somebody's company and being with someone. And if I'm not with someone, cool too.
So women are taught to seek out and align themselves with this fantasy image of benevolent patriarchy, where men will have all the classic markers of masculinity, but none of the side effects. As Hooks alluded to in that earlier passage, these women imagine benevolent patriarchs as protectors and providers who perform this perfect, pristine, gentle image of masculinity for them with no side effects, as long as these women play their parts and do all the things that your stereotypical pick-me says a woman should do to keep a man. There's actually an academic term in gender studies that basically describes the pick-me's called emphasized femininity. And it was first introduced by a person I've talked about before, gender theorist Raywin Connell, who also brought us hegemonic masculinity.
One form of femininity is defined around compliance with this subordination and is oriented to accommodating the interests and desires of men. I will call this emphasized femininity. Others are defined centrally by strategies of resistance or forms of non-compliance. Others again are defined by complex strategic combinations of compliance, resistance, and cooperation.
Emphasized femininity has a ton of reading around it. This is, as usual, a very short, punchy definition to just throw in here to introduce people. I'll leave more reading in the description if you want it, but in short, it's this image of what appropriate femininity is supposed to be in order to be this imagined helpmate to a good man: submissive, pure, delicate, nurturing, and most importantly, white. And in playing that role, these white women act as a corollary to hegemonic white men and construct frameworks and images of femininity that ultimately complement and reinforce white patriarchy at the cost of non-white women and ultimately white women themselves. With this in mind, it shouldn't surprise you that if you look at the type of messages sent towards Black women to be more feminine, there's a lot of subtle and not at all subtle coding that clearly indicates that being more feminine means being more like white women. This is a message given to Black women by the world, but also by Black men and even by other Black women. When you look at pick-me adjacent creators, Black and otherwise, your femininity coaches, soft life creators, Black women in luxury, etc., even when they're not overtly toxic and overtly saying some problematic stuff, you can't help but notice a pretty consistent, specific aesthetic that is promoted in these spaces, and it is clearly aimed towards imitating white femininity. Is it trying to send the message that if you can be like these women, like white women, then you'll never be a mule? Going back to their earlier quote describing Jackson's core fan base, the class distinction there is really key. Being too career-minded is a common complaint you'll hear in a lot of gender wars conversations, and that is no accident considering the types of men who participate in gender wars type content and the types that don't. I'm about to present a take that I will stand on no matter what. I don't have any data to back this up, but I guarantee that if you could go survey the average gender wars comment section and see the economic and education levels, you'd recognize that the women there as a group are going to have more money and be better educated than the men there. And what this tells you, ironically, is that many of the women arguing in these groups and comment sections with these men are arguing with the types of men that they really have no real interest in. And that's one of the reasons why the men there are so quick to act the donkey, because they know that these are the women that are going to reject them in real life. Like, the whole focus of the 50-50 conversation is about convincing women to compromise and date a man who doesn't have that mythical table that she's supposed to bring something to. And the problem is that many of these men can only afford 50-50, but still want 100% of the patriarchal dynamic in the home. This is why something like the passport bros has gotten popular, because a man that can only do 50-50 in America can be 100, 200% in these third world countries outside of America. They're basically just doing sex tourism and mail order brides like white men have done for generations. It's pretty gross and pathetic.
A lot of working class brothers are frustrated, but they're frustrated with the wrong people. It is the government that is removing your access to be able to generate these funds, bottom line. Because if we look pre-1960s, factory jobs, blue collar, like all of these things were plentiful. The Reagan manufacturing, like processing, all of these things used to be done on American soil. But then the autocratic or the oligarchs of the people who were making the money, they were like, damn, we can make more money if we outsource this and then shift it back in. That's where you got fucked.
But this isn't all men, of course. I empathize with the men who just want partnership and find themselves marginalized by their financial situation, but we're getting off track. The point is focusing on how economics and class impact what's going on in these conversations. For these professional women, they don't just want any old black men. They want the proverbial high value man. But for a multitude of reasons, those types of men are rare, and they're definitely not spending a lot of time in the gender wars comment section. There's a thing that happens when there's an imbalance of eligible bachelors and marriageable women that my friend Mac and Murphy talked about on another podcast.
So basically where men have limited economic opportunities and where there are too many men, right, you'll see more incels. Because first off, if there's too many men, then it's musical chairs, the mating market. Most people mate monogamously. And so most people aren't sharing. And so most people are going to be taken off the market as soon as they choose someone. And so that means that if there's too many men, there are going to be more men, even if all of them are perfectly marriageable, let's say, and that's not necessarily going to be true, then you're going to have more men excluded from the mating market. And this is going to get more intense if income inequality is super high, right? If scarcity is abundant at the lower end, because frankly, it's very hard to compete on the mating market as a male if some men are millionaires and some men are broke.
This is a well-researched and pretty logical phenomenon that jives with basic economic theory. By reducing the population of viable black men in the dating market, this puts a lot of power in the hands of a small portion of black men who do have good jobs, good education, etc. And as is typical of any situation where there is a clear power imbalance, many of these men use this imbalance to dictate unfair terms for romance with black women who desire them. What I'm getting at is that there are a lot of women who will get chose, but they'll end up sharing their high value men with other women. And to be honest, there's some women sharing great value or bargain bin men with other women.
Real quick addendum here. There is a prominent talking point from manosphere red pill types that like to argue that 80% of women are trying to date the same 20% of men. It won't look the way of the other 80% of men due to superficial reasons such as money, education, etc. And while there is some truth to this to some extent with other women, it's also a well-known thing that black women in particular are much more likely than other races of women to date and marry below their education and economic status. Just wanted to make sure that was understood so that my words aren't used to undergird any type of nonsense that, I wouldn't stand for. This idea that black women refuse to give non-air quotes high value men the time of day is false and continues to be false. Moving on.
This is an ugly reality and challenge for women who do crave monogamy, that desire to get these men with these higher qualities, who because of the opportunities they have with other women, can choose to not be faithful until they find a woman who allows them to do it. And that's just the being faithful part. They can also just not be all that good at being a partner, not be overly invested in sharing home duties, not be anything of great quality other than the accolades that they bring with them. And if that's enough for those women, I don't blame them for desiring that, but it is a challenge. And in response to this, some dating gurus will tell black women, hey, they should open themselves up to dating outside the race, maybe even specifically date just men from the Caribbean or Africa. Good luck with that one, ladies. Some of these people that say this, by the way, are low-key white supremacists, but I don't want to get sidetracked again. I used to think these were good solutions. If there aren't enough black men around you that you're interested in, go find love where it might find you. And I do still feel that way, but I realize now that this response is inadequate because it's a response focused on individual when the real problem is systemic. And this solution also isn't very viable because despite what certain creators like to promote in their content and the overrepresentation of interracial couples in media and on social media especially, black women are by far most desired by black men and vice versa. And black men and black women are least desired by men and women of other races. Now, there's nuance to that data, of course, but recognize that interracial dating for black women is incredibly rare, greatly because of how black women are devalued and demonized in society as a whole. This does not mean that black women aren't capable of finding love and happiness, but it does inform the type of grift that people use on black women to make them feel like they have to accept whatever, change whatever, or do whatever to find a mate. Be alone or be a mule seems like the only option. The last force I want to touch on coercing women into this patriarchal framework is the Black church. Many of these dating guru type figures attach themselves to the church. Tyler Perry got his start in the Black church play circuit. Steve Harvey and Kevin Samuels both evoke and often would play into a Black church pastor aesthetic to, improve their standing among Black women. The Black church is probably still the most prominent socializing institution for Black people to this day, although it has greatly declined, but it is where the cult of gender is preached the most, and really where that cult of gender gets to put its best foot forward. Black churches are predominantly filled with Black women, but always ran by Black men. And these Black men preach traditional conservative views of gender from the pulpit, and the women in the crowd clap. And there are a handful of idyllic nuclear families that walk through the Black church doors and carry an air of superiority and regality. Those men and women have done it. They've achieved gender, and it's celebrated in that space, even as it clearly seems to be rare, even as those families that we think are perfect have some of the same exact challenges that people have on the side, if not more. And even as the pastors of some of these churches have affairs with women in the congregation, none of that matters in the face of being chose, or in the case of men affirming their manhood by establishing dominion over a household. The church is often used as a buttress to excuse the harm that Black men do in relationships. Getting right with God is one of the first things any Black man does as soon as he gets into trouble, especially if he's caught cheating. Religious gaslighting is often used then to blame the Black women who are actually the victims of that bad treatment. The church also has often been a power center in Black communities, and that power is often collected among Black men. And those Black men can come together in the church to manage resources and watch each other's back. And so sometimes that's just business and community activity. Sometimes it's hiding infidelity, and hiding that infidelity is excused as the natural difficulty of a man fulfilling his needs. And Black women are told either you forgive that man who fulfills his needs or admit you don't love Jesus. And this is not to say that there aren't other Black churches that are apart from these toxic traditions, but even those churches don't have the best track record of preparing anyone, male or female, for the dating world outside of church. Women brought up in the best, most progressive churches are often brought up under this fantasy of benevolent patriarchy because that's what they've read in the Bible and that's what they've seen in the pulpit, but they don't ever really get to look behind the screens. And many men who have been behind that veil learn how to prey on this naivete, and that again is where Derrick Jaxn comes in. The point to this section is to illustrate that for Black women, the dating world is uniquely perilous. There's a constant, intense pressure to achieve within it, but to achieve means to open yourself up to so many forms of harm, yet to fail means to be seen as broken or lesser than. And all the while, so many people are gaslighting Black women into thinking that they're the ones who are insane for recognizing how fucked up the situation is. And with Derrick Jaxn, this is kind of not what you get. Because while the vast majority of people making dating and relationship content for women play into all of these tropes and themes, telling women to be submissive, telling them to be more softer, telling them to, follow behind their man or have a 90-day rule before having sex and all that stuff. Derrick Jaxn didn't do that. Derrick Jaxn, as I said, kind of gave good advice. When I was initially writing and researching, I was all ready to group Jaxn into the same category as your typical gender wars dating guru types, championing patriarchy and a woman's role in it. I was ready to accuse him of selling benevolent patriarchy and selling emphasized femininity to Black women and pulling it all into a conservative ideology in order to gaslight women into accepting toxic frameworks as they exist. But that's not really what he does. Try as I could, I watched video after video of Derrick Jaxn, and I couldn't find a ton of things he said that were obvious red flags or endorsements of benevolent patriarchy, at least not in the way that we would imagine. Sure, he does do a bit of women should respect themselves and be his piece in there, but overall, Jaxn preached an ideology that directly would conflict with the way that a lot of other dating gurus who were pro-women usually would talk. In analyzing his content, it seems like Derrick Jaxn understood every piece of the pie that I illustrated in this section and sought to provide advice on how to avoid this stuff. Again, without pulling on any real structural analysis or feminist ideology, he would still find ways to deconstruct how patriarchal norms and expectations on women would expose them to harm. And more importantly, he would tell women how to see through this stuff. This is why I said earlier that I die on the hill that Jaxn gave useful advice. For those black women who feel pressure to be picked, to affirm their value as a real woman by becoming wise and achieving that ideal image of femininity, Derrick Jaxn was a great benefit. For those petite bourgeois black women in particular with a little education, little money, but no man who were kissing frogs over and over, he would at least help you understand how to identify who definitely was a frog before you gave them a kiss. And from a non-progressive, non-feminist, non-systemic analysis standpoint, I can't hate on that. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but that's good. Every black woman isn't ready or interested in reading Kimberly Crenshaw. Some women just want to have a good partner or a good time or avoid the recovery from a bad partner or a bad time. And there's nothing wrong with that. From a particular standpoint, Derrick Jaxn was good actually, but something was still off. And y'all already know what it was. Part 4. Signs that he's a narcissist. So if I can't truly come down on Derrick Jaxn as a villain of the gender wars, then why even bother talking about him? The full breadth of Jackson's content is not nearly to the level of harm as I've seen in the manosphere or podcast land or dating coaching, etc. So what's the point? To explain this, we finally have to get into Derrick Jaxn's dirt. In more than a few of his videos, Jaxn does this subtle thing where he signals to the audience that it's possible to have direct interactions with him.
So over the last couple of weeks, I've been doing some one-on-ones with you guys through my Instagram live chat, through conference calls, just trying to connect on a more personal level to handle your situations as you bring them to me. But
it's subtle, but as a content creator, at least for me, it stands out as a thing that I know I would never do. Most, I would say, normal content creators, or at least ones with sense, put in a lot of effort to make sure there is a clear division between them and their audience. Parasocial relationships are important to being an influencer or a content creator, etc. You want your audience to like you and imagine having a connection with you. And in many ways they do, but to give an audience direct access to you is kind of dangerous and opens up a lot of room for problems. But Jaxn did it because he understood what the product was. The product was him. Well, I stand on the statement that Jaxn offered useful advice to his target audience. I can't deny that he also milked that audience for every possible penny during that time. Over the course of his decade of dominance, Jaxn built a social media empire that was not just amassing all those followers and views, etc., but he also was doing online courses, private coaching, and creating learning communities along with those books that he had done independently. That is a classic model that micro celebrities use to cash in on their influencer status. Being a content creator alone is not the most lucrative thing. And in fact, it's very volatile. The algorithm may love you one day and ignore what you do the next day. But if you're good, you'll always have a devoted fan base, and selling them a part of you in the form of a course or private coaching is basically free money. Being a coach is basically just talking to people directly, and most courses made by influencers are pure grift of you selling them the same stuff they could get from your videos for free. Jaxn's mini books are all less than 150 pages long, and they're small pages with large fonts. Let me see, do I have one? I don't have one nearby. We'll put one on B-roll. But because they're self-published and go for like $5, $10, $15, you sell a few thousand of those out of your millions of followers and you will make a nice amount of money. And when you have a thirsty, desperate population looking for support and you market yourself as Big Brother advice, you can rest assured that you're going to build a very lucrative community for yourself. Jaxn doesn't just milk his audience for money. He engulfs himself in an almost messianic circle of approval and adulation. He creates an environment where he can do no wrong. And in that type of environment, I don't know if it's possible to be truly critical of your own behavior, but as his story plays out, I find it hard to believe he wanted to be critical of his own behavior. So let's get to the details. As Jaxn's career takes off, one question remains for a lot of people. If this man is so amazing and so pro-woman, where is his wife? For years, this seemed to be a question and led to much speculation. Jaxn did say he was with someone, but why did he hide her? Couples and family content is a huge moneymaker, far more lucrative than what he was doing. What was his goal with keeping her under wraps? Was he just hiding her to appear single and available? Was his wife not all that attractive? Was he secretly gay? Was his wife white? According to him, the rumor of his wife being white cost him thousands of subscribers one time. Yet he still kept his relationship status mostly under wraps. He stated eventually that he kept her out of the spotlight for her own protection. And this is something I can understand. My wife has barely been visible online for similar reasons. But if I were doing purely relationship content, I'd feel like it'd be really suspicious if I didn't ever present anything about my own relationship. I won't call this a red flag, but we will say that this was a thread that his enemies definitely decided to follow and try to unravel. And enter an unsuspecting guest star in this story, one Tasha K. For those who are uninitiated, Tasha K was or is kind of still a YouTube gossip blogger. I don't know her actual status. She got really big for years just being the worst type of muckraking, drama farming gossip person. She would find dirt on any and everyone. And when she didn't have dirt, she would just make shit up. Most of you know who she is and know her as the person that got sued by Cardi B for defamation and harassment. And that has, as far as I can tell, mostly ruined her career. But well before the Cardi stuff, Tasha K was an enemy of Derrick Jaxn and was much more prominent in the gossip commentary space. I don't know how the beef started, but for a while, Tasha had been throwing out accusations about Jaxn secretly being a man whore who had multiple mistresses and babies that he didn't take care of, or possibly even women that he had forced to get abortions. This didn't have much of an effect on Jaxn. Like I said earlier, he had created an aura of perfection around himself, and many people knew Tasha K to be the type of person to fabricate stories. But then suddenly she had proof. Tasha K scored an interview with one of Jaxn's alleged mistresses. And while no public expose on a man's secret sex life was good, the sordid nature of the story told about Derrick Jaxn by this woman was more than damning. It exposed a man whose private life was in extreme conflict with his public persona.
Okay, sent her money, $1,400 for plane tickets and everything, okay, to come down there and give his married ass some ass, but yet he's on the internet telling y'all to keep your motherfucking legs closed and black men don't cheat. That's what he said. He said black men don't cheat. But if you saw the date on the bottom of that photo, it said August 1st, 2020. So why are you posting your wife 3 weeks after you flew a chick out to Miami, okay?
This mistress spoke of Jaxn's manipulation of her, the way he hid his affairs from his wife, his aggressive sexual nature, and how he used his platform to lure in women who wanted dated advice, instead got a date with Derrick Jaxn. Almost every bad thing you could imagine about Derrick Jaxn, it seemed like he was low-key doing. It was like the men who hated Derrick Jaxn had replaced him with an evil clone just to expose them for the world to see. Then a second mistress emerged, and possibly a third. And this amazingly was in the middle of the release of Jaxn's newest book, which ironically finally prominently featured his wife and speaks to their work to mend their marriage, dubiously titled Heal Together Without Hurting Each Other. And this isn't happening in the mid or early 2010s where Twitter is still developing. No, this is happening in 2021 during COVID, where people got all the time in the world to talk about it. And they did. A cheating scandal is bad. Worse if your public persona is that of a pro-woman and anti-toxic man crusader, but it maybe isn't the end of the world. People love a redemption story as long as you handle things well after the scandal is over, but Derrick Jaxn did not handle things well. After a few days of exposing, Jaxn decided to go on the defensive. His channel goes live and the first image you see is this. Derrick Jaxn with his wife, who most people are meeting for the first time, sitting with a glazed, detached look on her face in a bonnet. And it was a disaster. My first instinct is still to laugh at this image even now, knowing what I know, because it's just so patently bizarre. I cannot believe this is a real thing. A script writer couldn't have come up with a better scenario for jokes. The pro-black woman dating guru who tells you to crown yourself and tells you how to avoid toxic men. He's now bringing her out so she can protect him from his own mistakes that she was the victim of. All that protect her stuff was clearly out the window because he didn't think to tell her to change or take her hair down or maybe just wrap it, or to plan to not do this right now and maybe wait a couple of days. But no, this had to happen immediately. Further, unbeknownst to us at the moment, Denia, his wife, is also several months pregnant, as well as grieving the loss of a relative, along with having just watched her husband be exposed as a cheater for the world to see. But for the sake of the brand, she does this live with him, where she talks about how she forgave him for his past transgressions. Yes, they go with the story that Jaxn's cheating days were in his past and that they happened at a time when they weren't together and that they had already healed from this moment in the relationship and were pushing toward the future together, which just also happens to be the subject matter of his new book. Yeah. Also, another thing he said, don't put him on a pedestal. Disregard the ways he's put himself on a pedestal in his content, because the only person you should put on the pedestal is, you guessed it, God. About that God part. So you might remember, yeah, it gets worse. So you might remember a very viral and very hilarious clip of a woman being exorcised by a pastor from an oral sex demon.
Look that demo. Look, oral demo. You see sex. Look. You sex. You let that sperm of that man out. What are we talking about?
Many people might remember this. You probably thought it was like a skit or staged or just some weird one-off internet thing, but no, it was real. This is Pastor Ed Centronelli, and he's just kind of your typical scum of the earth, snake oil selling pastor doing deliverance ministry and exorcisms and blessing in his church, obviously all for a small fee. His church is also greatly full of first-generation immigrant Black and brown people who he preys upon, and you will never in a million years guess who pops up in the background as one of his exorcist bouncers. I don't know. It's Derrick Jaxn. It's Derrick Jaxn, y'all. Derrick Jaxn went to the weird church. A lot of people speculate whether or not this was Derrick Jaxn's church. In another video, Centronelli can be seen using his magical powers to predict that Derrick is a writer of some sort. And then Denia sings a solo, and it's...
Get ready. Can I prophesy a date? Prophesy, Papa. Give that woman a microphone.
Hallelujah, salvation and glory.
I'm trying not to draw much more negative attention to Denia, though it's hard to tell the story without doing that. She's been through a lot, least of all being married to Derrick Jaxn, but the evidence points to her being the one who was really into this church in the first place. Like, Jaxn, as far as I can tell, has barely openly acknowledged this church, but Denia still goes to this church as far as I can tell. She at least brings it up in her content that she's made years after they separated. In the aftermath of Derrick being exposed, Denia had exhibited some really bizarre behavior on social media that had many wondering whether or not she was of sound mind and safe. There's a lot of things she said in her many interviews and her moments live that, yeah, there's just stuff going on there that I don't even want to get into, but I'm hoping that folks can heal. And I say that genuinely because, like, all of the other real trauma she went through in her life before Derrick Jaxn, it also had to be highly traumatic to endure life with him. And it's probably this same emotional trauma that a guy like Centronelli definitely would have had no problem preying upon. And considering what we know about Jaxn and all the things he said, you kind of help but feel that it's incredibly gross that he put her in this position in the first place. And then it continues to get worse. A few days after this poorly received apology, Jaxn drops a new reaction video, and it's a video reacting to his own apology. Derrick Jaxn reacts to a Derrick Jaxn video, apologizing for some stuff that Derrick Jaxn did. With a straight face, no sense of irony, no like wink and a nod, just pure detachment as if the person in the video that he's watching isn't him. It is the most bizarre video possibly in the history of Black media.
D, I think I want to see a reaction to this video. So let's do it. And by the way, I'm gonna speak in third person. A lot of you already seen this, but this is Derrick Jaxn. A lot of people think of him as a relationship expert and guru and all of that. Well, he and his wife are making this video because apparently at some point in their marriage, or maybe even beforehand in the relationship, he didn't take his own advice and he stepped out and he got involved with other women, as you heard them say.
And by the way, he's very, very nice to Derrick Jaxn. Derrick Jaxn would never have been as nice to Derrick Jaxn as Derrick Jaxn was in this video where Derrick Jaxn reacts to Derrick Jaxn. Oh, and then at the end, he reminds you to pre-order his new book and that you, like this person in the video, can also heal if you read this book.
Y'all let me know what you think down in the comments. And by the way, he has a book detailing how he and his wife overcame all of this in their private lives a long time ago, matter of fact. It's called Heal Together Without Hurting Each Other. So if you're in a situation like this, you want to let God in to totally restore it better than new, click the link down in the bio or up in the bio in the caption. I got a 50% off deal for you guys who are watching this video right now.
What a week. Again, also mentioned that all of this happened in the past, which by the way was eventually exposed as a lie. Jaxn had in fact been cheating on his wife while they were together, something he would admit to later, and not just cheated on her, but brought his extra women around her and made sex videos that she ended up seeing. Denia says she would watch videos of him having sex with other women just to see what they had that she didn't have. Yeah. So aside from the bizarre nature of this whole series of moments, it was also still built on ugly, ugly lies. The truth is that for this entire time, the reason that Derrick Jaxn was able to provide such insightful and effective advice around avoiding bad relationships and toxic men is because he was talking about himself. Derrick Jaxn has like 4 or 5 videos on narcissistic men. And I'm not saying Derrick Jaxn is a narcissist, but he might. Derrick Jaxn might.
The most dangerous narcissists are those guys who up front are knights in white shiny armor. I mean, they're becoming, they're enthusiastic and charismatic, fun to be around. The things that they want out of life in a relationship are all very becoming. But once they get into a relationship, a few months or maybe even a year in, they do a 180 into a complete monster. I mean, they treat you borderline, if not outright evil.
I've struggled to figure out whether this was just pure wickedness on his part, or maybe just what happens when you're too internet brained and caught up in the facade of your own social media presence as a big creator. Again, Jaxn started all of this in his early 20s when reportedly him and Denia weren't even an official couple, and well before we all knew the effects of social media on all of us. So the generous part of me wants to say that he got lost in his own sauce, because I know personally that it's hard to remain balanced in the world of social media fame. When a person has to hear that someone doesn't like them or that they did something wrong or stupid, when you have people attacking you, like when that happens to a normal person, they get defensive. They want to address the problem, maybe yell or scream at something, say something to the person that said something to them. And at an individual small level, this is normal. It's not a huge deal. But for people who have literally thousands of comments like that a day, and that's their job, you get a warped sense of reality and how to respond to criticism. Because there's always people being negative towards you. And the vast majority of that negativity is completely unreasonable and uncharitable. And you learn to tune that out. You learn to ignore negativity towards you as if you haven't done anything wrong. And then there's hundreds of thousands of people telling you that you're great and you've helped change their lives and whatever you're doing, it's really good. And you got to learn not to listen to motherfuckers either, because those are people that like you. They're fans of yours. And if you don't understand that your fans might love you, but don't have your best interest in mind, you may end up doing something stupid like this. You might embarrass yourself and your wife and exhibit all the toxic traits that you warn women against. You ruin your family. The one thing that I genuinely believe Jaxn said he wanted after he grew up without his father. And now he's a part-time father and dad of, I think, 2 or 3 girls of his own. And all other criticism aside, Jaxn seems like he wants to be a present father. And as a father myself, I can't help but hurt for the idea that he destroyed his own family by getting lost in his own clout or not checking his own narcissistic behavior. When this all happened, Jaxn faced immense backlash as video after video comes out making fun of him, calling him a hypocrite, calling him a narcissist. More sordid details of his failed marriage emerge, and it all comes crumbling down. He becomes the butt of many jokes. All of the men who hated him are vindicated. He even gets donkey of the day. Jaxn and Denia seemingly tried to fix their marriage over the course of a year until officially ending their marriage in late 2022. And by then, his cancellation is complete and he fades into obscurity. Maybe he got deeper into that weird church he was a part of. It's hard to say, but whatever it is, it really does serve as a hard lesson on internet fame and the fleeting affections of an audience, let alone what happens when you build a brand in the gender war space, but you weren't interested in actually protecting Black women or addressing the issues that they face in your real life. It's ugly, but at least we can feel like he was held accountable for his awful behavior. I'm just kidding. This nigga's still making content, y'all.
But watch all the way through to the end. I'm gonna tell you the number one way to rid yourself not only of that particular narcissist, but everyone that thinks that they can come in your life and repeat the same patterns.
This video started out as a general overview of the gender wars as a concept. It was to be a spiritual follow-up to like my Black Love is Dead video I released on Valentine's Day some years ago, and it was supposed to come out on Valentine's Day. And then like I started doing research for it, and then suddenly Derrick Jaxn popped up, and I'm like, oh, I remember Derrick Jaxn. And then like I was like, wait, this is new. And when I looked, I was like, yo, this dude barely even took a break, and he definitely didn't slow down. As I scrolled through his Instagram page researching for this video, I was shocked to see that he still posts regularly on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Short form content has been a boom for him as his reels and TikToks constantly get him hundreds of thousands of views. He's still doing speaking engagement. And although he hasn't written any more books, he still offers classes, personal coaching, and has built a community function within his social media footprint. And all of this stuff together means he's probably making just as much money, if not more, than before all this happened. So nothing happened. He suffered a personal loss, right? Like, that's a thing. But in terms of like his presence and his content and his persona, nothing changed. He still talks about cheaters and narcissists like he's not a cheater and a narcissist. What do we do with that? What does that say about the gender wars when there's never any casualties in this war, where people on either side of the battlefield can be found out to be frauds and exposed as grifters, yet still manage to amass wealth and resources through their content surrounding these topics? Because please understand, the fact that he posted right through this, I realize now, shouldn't be surprising. There have always been countless scandals, exposés, evidence of people not living what they talk about in this type of content, and people still watch. Views are still amassed and money is still made. How is this happening? How is this possible? How could Jaxn do all of this and get so thoroughly exposed and come back like nothing happened? Because it is like nothing happened. And that's because there is a stronger, more sinister and problematic force making all of this possible. And if we're ever going to address the problems of this type of content, we need to bring that force into light. And I did enough research that I've been able to identify two main forces that control, promote, and spread this type of content to Black people, vulnerable Black folks, over and over again, pretty much across the world. The first force responsible are the greedy big tech social media companies, and the second force responsible is you. For some of you, this may be your first time ever seeing one of my videos. But if you follow me regularly, then you know I've talked a lot about the algorithm, aka the machine learning program that probably brought my video to your attention in the first place, because it decides what you watch on YouTube. But not just YouTube, there's algorithms for TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much any app that gives you a feed and you see it through an infinite scroll, that has an algorithm. When you open up these apps, the algorithm has a recommendation system that shows you what it thinks you would want to see. And it knows this based on a lot of information and data that it's collected about you. So, people say that, oh, social media is so toxic. When I open up these apps, all I see is, that's low-key a self-report, because my algorithm, my app feed doesn't look like that. If you ignore anything else I said in this video, this next thing is the one thing I want you to please believe. The AI and the machine learning systems that these apps use to decide what you see when you open the app are legit psychic. They use hundreds of thousands of pieces of information and data about us as consumers and viewers and users on social media to figure out what makes us click, literally. And they literally know what type of content that you'll be most likely to watch, probably better than you do. And these are well-developed, highly reliable systems that have been learning about us since we made our first search on Google, or if you're as old as me, like Excite or something. Your consumption speaks to your own health within this discourse. And if you're surrounded by toxic stuff in your social media feeds, it probably means you're a toxic person, low-key. And like, you should do something about that.
Because that's how the algorithm works. Like, bro, the algorithm be telling on people, but they don't want to admit it. People want People want content that reinforces what it is that they already believe so that they can have the permission to continue to hold on to. Knowing that this type of hierarchy does not exist outside of their purview. So if I can continue to engage in my purview and then consistently get this reinforcement, I no longer have to continue to be challenged by people who think outside of me.
I cannot stress enough that this is not some hotep conspiracy theory. This is legitimate fact. I don't say this as some random dude on YouTube. I say this as a successful, well-connected YouTuber who's been researching this stuff for years now. And my understanding of it is one of the reasons why I'm successful at this in the first place. This shit is real. There's a rule of thumb in the tech industry that if the product that you're using is free, then that's not the product, you're the product. And these social media apps are most definitely free, but they make their money through hacking and learning about you. You might think you're unique and complex and that your mind is your own and you built different and all that stuff, but you're actually super predictable. The job you work, the things you like, the comments you leave, the reels you watch and share, your age, region, your friends and what they watch and click on and share. All this allows the systems to predict relatively strongly what you want to watch, or at least what you will watch, regardless of if you want to watch it, because it knows what will keep you engaged. And a major key that all of these social media platforms know is that strong emotions equals engagement. And these companies know that the easiest emotions they can manipulate are anger, rage, disgust, and derision. You know, the exact type of emotions that you feel when you see one of these red balloons pop. These 20v1 red balloon videos are everywhere. They are plagued, but to be fair, they're incredibly entertaining, aren't they? In a schadenfreude type of way, meaning that a type of humor or pleasure that we derive by seeing someone else that's not us going through a bad situation, in pain or having misfortune. And that's not unique to Black people or unique to social media. It's why, you know, the Three Stooges were a thing, or America's Funniest Home Video, Bad Singers and American Idol. The cruel streak is in all of us. And when we see someone suddenly slip and fall, we intrinsically laugh at them falling before wondering if they're okay. And then when we know they're okay, we start laughing again. These balloon popping videos play into that emotion by putting people in a space to be embarrassed. And we get satisfaction from that. Of course you think it's funny when the short guy gets his balloon popped over and over again every time as the first person to get his balloon popped. Of course, when the dark-skinned girl gets her balloon popped first, it gives us permission to laugh at the thing we know we're not supposed to, but a lot of y'all secretly still believe. It gives us a feeling of superiority or disgust, and so we watch. And the balloon popping 20v1 videos are just gender wars content distilled into a perfect package, a package that if I were less scrupulous, I would be doing once a month, because them things do fucking numbers. And I know this because the algorithm knows this and the creators know this. We know that videos that make you outraged or mad, you will click, you will share, you will watch, you will comment, and you won't think twice about it, but you will then say later, I don't know why social media is so toxic. Like, what's wrong with y'all? Like, how do y'all not know that the Cheesecake Factory videos are all fake? Some of y'all do, you don't care. You just want to watch the messy content. Ain't none of y'all watched a single one of these alpha male podcasts all the way through. But you'll listen to them 5-second snippets of them saying the dumbest shit ever. Dudes be talking about not washing their ass. 5 million views. Why is social media so toxic? Why is social media so toxic, y'all? You tell me. I posted one of these reels talking to Mac and Murphy like 2 months ago, just saying incels are kind of bad. And these motherfuckers been in my comment section arguing ever since. It is more comments than anything I've ever had on Instagram. I'm not here to judge. I am judging a little bit. I'm judging a little bit, but I get it. I still watch professional wrestling, but the difference is when I watch wrestling, like most people that watch wrestling, I know it's not real. And I'm afraid I don't know if some of y'all have that same understanding.
It wasn't that everything he said was wrong. It was that he was preying on a unique vulnerability in women. I think a lot of Derrick's audience, we talked about this, they want Derrick Jaxn, right? They want Derrick Jaxn. They want a man who shows up the way he shows up. So they ignore some of the red flags in his rhetoric because, you know, they want him, right? So that's the kind of parasocial sort of relationship.
Candace said a similar thing. Candace said she said if it didn't start out as a way to build up his DM backlog, it eventually became that, and it probably still is that to an extent.
So I won't judge you, but I'm gonna challenge you to be more conscious and be more informed as a consumer of the content you appreciate. Because the thing that this stuff tends to do is bubble you into a specific worldview and ideology. I watch wrestling, but I'm not hitting anyone in the head with a steel chair in real life. But so many of y'all are trying to treat black women or black men in real life the same way that you perceive them online. When you surround yourself with toxic images, regardless of all the other stuff around gender and misogyny, etc., you're going to have those images affect how you see the world. And the best thing in the world for creators of this type of content is that you never find happiness outside of their space. So every time they put something stupid or ignorant or outrageous on Instagram or social media in general, and you watch it and you believe it, that doesn't just make them money then, that means you're probably gonna be a returning customer. And this is likely the driving factor behind Derrick Jaxn's strategy himself. Make himself the focus of the solution so he can keep selling you his time and attention. And how could you resist? How could anything outside in the real world compare to the facade that was Derrick Jaxn? As long as there is pain to exploit and social media companies to funnel viewers, there will always be people like Jaxn offering support for a nominal fee, regardless of the quality of their content or the content of their character. That is the reality of the influencer economy. If you want Derrick Jaxn to go away, if you want to end the gender wars, you got to disengage. Find a way to cleanse your palette in your feed. You can literally reset your feed by clearing all the data from it, unfollow all these accounts that are attached to this type of content. And if you're not a professional influencer or something, a true cleanse means maybe restarting your account. And then just be mindful of what you consume going forward. Because I want to be clear, it's not hard to be entertained by shitty, mean-spirited content. But if you want to avoid it, you have to start fresh. And what that actually means is getting your own life in order. Because if you are surrounded and constantly engaged with toxic nonsense, you're going to attract that not just in your life in general, but also in your social media feeds. It's going to become a just feedback loop of mess and nonsense. And if you can, be more informed about the totality of these systems as a whole. The system of gender that all of us are deeply invested in keeps us spinning our wheels and fighting to attain a status that we can't embody. And they work in tandem with these systems on social media that take advantage of the pain you feel by not being connected to this ideal but false image of masculinity or femininity. Black men and women have a lot of challenges, and we have a lot of challenges with each other. But I don't care what the passport bros tell you or what any other community that says similar things. Collectively, Black people are all that we have in this country, and the times when we've prospered the most are when we've been able to collect together and get on one accord for action and change. And that doesn't mean settling. That doesn't mean allowing yourself to be abused and used in relationships. That doesn't mean not demanding being treated with kindness and respect and empathy. It just means working it out as best you can with what you got. And I know that's what I'm trying to do at least, and I hope you'll do the same. Speaking of collecting together to do big things, I want to talk to you all about today's sponsor, Nebula. There's a strong chance that those of you who just watched this are watching me for the first time and asking, did this man just talk for over an hour and a half about a micro celebrity that no one outside of a small pocket of people has ever heard of? And did I just watch a long ass video about a micro celebrity that most people have never heard of? If you're seeing this, then the obvious answer to those questions are yes. And since that's the case, let me introduce you to your new favorite streaming service, Nebula. Nebula is an independent streaming service created by creators like myself as a place where we can make some of the most interesting, in-depth, ambitious, and sometimes very long content that small creators can offer in our modern social media, new media landscape. And because Nebula exists, I can take chances at making videos like this one that I can't guarantee will be super popular on YouTube. I can also make my shorter video on the masculinity of Tupac that was too spicy for certain people on YouTube. Speaking of too spicy, can I introduce you to Broy de Chanel
and Maggie Mae Fish, who have both done series about the history of sex in film, videos that simply can't exist on YouTube without getting blocked or demonetized, and these are just the tip of the iceberg. Nebula also has history, science, and tech, and with their help, docuseries, independent films, and stage plays, all ad-free and without sponsorship reads like the one you're watching right now. And we can do this not because we are owned by a big tech corporation or ran by the types of algorithms I spent half of this video talking about, but most significantly, supporting Nebula also helps support me. I've been with Nebula for going on 3 years now, and in that time, I've been able to do a ton to grow as a creator, invest in my content, invest in talented people to help me make better stuff, and improve in ways that aren't always possible on YouTube. I am able to do this because of you, the viewer, and your direct support. By signing up today and using my promo code FD Signifier, which you can find in the description of this video, you will not only get 40% off a yearly subscription, you will also be helping independent creators grow one of the most exciting platforms in existence. And for me personally, you'll make it so I never have to be afraid of making content that isn't trending or won't get love for the algorithm, like the one you just finished watching today. Thank you so much for this, by the way, and thank you to Nebula for sponsoring this video. Peace.